You're listening to Broadening My Horizons on Paris Underground Radio. For more great content, please visit parisundergroundradio.com.
Hello, and welcome to Abroadening My Horizons on Paris Underground Radio. My name is Abby Riffel, and I'm a 21-year-old college student from a small town in Kansas who is living in Paris for the summer and will be bringing you along with me as I discover the city. All right, so it is a little bit later and I just landed in Paris, so I thought I would recap you guys on what it was like traveling to Paris. So to get here, I flew out of Kansas City, and from Kansas City I went to Philadelphia, and then from Philadelphia I went to the Charles de Gaulle Airport, which is the one that takes you to Paris. So like I've mentioned before, I have almost no experience traveling, so I've never been outside of the US. And when my family traveled growing up, we'd usually only travel to another state in like the Midwest region, which was like Colorado or Texas or Oklahoma. And occasionally, I think 1 or 2 times, we went to Florida. And one of those times we drove, one of those times we flew. So my flying experience is really limited. Just my travel in general is really, really limited. Like I could count the number of times I've flown on a plane before this trip on one hand. So I was a little nervous traveling by myself because the last time I had flown was before I got into high school. And so I couldn't really remember like the process of how airports worked. Before I left for this trip, I used to joke and I'd say, oh, you could drop me off at an airport and I would have no idea where to go next. Just because, like I said, I don't know the process. I didn't know that you had to do check-in and then you went through security and then you could go find your gate and then there was boarding. I just couldn't really remember that process because it had been so long. And I didn't really know if anything had changed about that process since the pandemic, since the last time I flew was before COVID-19 shut everything down. But with that being said, when I was dropped off at the airport, I was able to find my way around fairly easily. There's a lot of signs. It's kind of hard to miss where you're supposed to be and how to do it. But also the airport staff was very nice and they were really sweet. I asked them a lot of questions when I was checking in, and some of them were probably like a little bit silly in my questions, but they just answered them all very nice and they did not seem judgmental about it. And the fact that I didn't really know what I was doing, but I made it through security and then I found my gate. And then I got there, I got through the airport surprisingly fast. So I just chilled at my gate for a couple of hours until it was time to board. And I booked my flight intentionally so that I would have a 2 to 3 hour layover when I did. I thought it would be good to get my feet on solid ground, maybe have time to eat, have time to rest if I was feeling overwhelmed. But I'm really glad I did that because my first plane did not leave on time at all. And a bunch of people on that plane actually missed their connecting flights. And because I had booked those 2 to 3 hour layovers, I was golden to go. I had just enough time to get to the airport, find my gate, eat something, call my family, and then go and get on the plane. So I landed in Philadelphia and then I boarded onto my international flight. And when I was getting on the plane, that was the first time someone spoke French to me, because my family would try to say French phrases, before I left, but I know they're not actually French. But one of the flight attendants said welcome to me in French, and my brain literally froze. When you screenshot on your iPhone and it kind of freezes for a second and then it goes, my brain did a screenshot. I don't know why I did that. It literally put me into a mini shock. And I think that was when I started to really become aware that I was getting ready to leave the United States and that I would not be hearing a lot of English. The whole time I was on my flights, it just didn't really feel real. I felt like I was just kind of going through the motions. It didn't feel okay, you're traveling on your own. Okay, you're leaving Kansas. Okay, you're leaving the United States. So when the flight attendant spoke French to me, I think that's when it kind of hit me and it jolted my mind and my body like that, which I thought was funny. But yeah, so I got onto the plane and the flight attendant spoke to me and then I found my seat and I did not realize how much nicer international flights are than non-international flights. So I didn't know that we got little pillows and blankets in our seats. And when I went to find my seat, I thought that was the person sitting next to me's pillow and blanket. And then I realized that it was mine. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is so nice. And I didn't know that there's going to be the entertainment center with movies and TV shows that you get to watch for free. And they gave us dinner and breakfast. And I was just like impressed with all of it because I've never been on an international flight and I wasn't expecting all of that. So I kind of felt like special there for a minute compared to my non-international flight earlier, which was not very fun at all. The flight itself, it went pretty well. I mean, it was 7 hours long, which wasn't terrible. And I slept probably like 5 of the 7 hours. I was hoping that that would help with jet lag. And I honestly think it did. But the worst part of the flight was that it made my legs swell really, really bad. And that became really painful for me. And I even had a lot of leg room. Like I had a window seat that had kind of like an aisle next to me, but it wasn't an aisle anyone could like walk through. So I could put my legs there. And even with that extra room, I was like, my legs are aching terribly and I can't do anything about it. And I would like walk down the aisle and just kind of like try to move my legs as much as possible, but it didn't really help. And my legs just hurt so bad. And I had no ibuprofen on me. I had nothing I could really take for it. So that was like the worst part of the plane ride, worst part of getting to Paris in general, I would say. And then when we finally landed in France, that was weird because I guess I was expecting like, I don't know, like some grand reveal or a very noticeable difference. But when we landed, I would have thought that I was anywhere in America. I mean, it was just like an airport. Honestly, like it wasn't disappointing that it wasn't like that grand reveal. It was kind of comforting. It made me like feel more calm about like being in another country. And so I got through the airport super fast. The line to stamp my passport was super short. And then I found my luggage in like less than 10 minutes. So everything went extremely smooth for me just landing there. It was kind of like a dream. Like I couldn't tell I was in another country. I got through the airport insanely fast. I just like really didn't feel like I was in France and not in America until I went a little bit more into the airport because I was meeting with my program coordinators there. And I got completely lost. And like I've talked about, I am directionally challenged. And so this airport was huge and I could not find my way around and I couldn't connect my phone to the Wi-Fi. I don't know why, but it wasn't working. So I could not text or message or get a hold of anyone. So for like probably like an hour to an hour and a half, I was just like wandering around the airport, hoping to figure out where to go or like how to get connected. And I was eventually like, okay, I probably need to ask for help. But I didn't even know where to go to ask for that kind of help or who to walk up to because all I heard was French around me. I heard no English, which I had just heard like English around me not that long ago. So I was like, where did all these English speaking people go? There's only French people around here. And nobody was wearing like a uniform that indicated that they worked in the airport. So I literally just found a bench and sat down and tried to connect my phone to the Wi-Fi. And eventually, I don't know what I did, but eventually I was able to connect it. And I texted my program coordinator and I told her, and I was like, I am so miserably lost right now. And so she came and she got me and we all got in a taxi and drove to where I will be staying at for this next month. And on our drive back from the airport, when we were like heading to my apartment, I just kept thinking about like how similar France looked to America because we weren't really like driving through the city. We were driving, I guess, in the outskirts. I don't know where we were at, honestly. So that was like so weird. I kept having to like tell myself, okay, you are in Paris. Okay, you are not in America because like what I was seeing wasn't matching up with like my perceptions of what I should be seeing, I guess, if that makes sense. Where I'm staying is not super close in the city to tourist attractions. It wasn't like the Google images of Paris that you see. Like it's a more residential area. So it doesn't quite look like what I imagined. So it was really weird because I felt like it looked like Kansas City or kind of like any other city. And so that really like made it feel unreal that I was actually here in Paris. And I kept having to remind myself, okay, you are in Paris. This is your real life. This is where you live now and all that. And so it was just like, keep telling myself that. And on my first night here, they actually took the interns to the Eiffel Tower at night and it started sparkling. And I think that was kind of when it started clicking, like, okay, you are standing here and you are looking up at this like international icon that people spend their whole lives without seeing in person, and you're here. And I think that was when it started to click. You are not in America. You are in Paris. This is your real life, Abby. And so that was just such a beautiful way, I feel like, to end your first day in Paris. That was kind of when it all clicked for me, and I started getting out of this dreamlike haze where I felt like I was just walking through the motions. When I saw that tower sparkling, it was like a movie, but the movie was my life. I don't know how else to describe it. Yeah, so the first thing that surprised me that first night was, it was probably around midnight when we saw the tower or started heading home from the tower. And I felt like so many people in the city were out and like doing things or were out and about. And I know I keep comparing Kansas City to Paris, which is not really fair at all, but that's kind of the only comparison I have it to. But I feel like in Kansas City, especially since the pandemic, if it's like midnight around Kansas City, there's not really a lot to do. So I don't know, I felt like in Paris, like people were out and they were just having fun or just going about their nights. And that was really weird for me, that it seemed like it was kind of late, but people were still out and about. So I thought it would be a good idea to go back on the things that I said in my first podcast that I was worried about or that I was expecting to experience here, and kind of talk about what my experience has been with those since I arrived. So in my first podcast, I talked about how I had stopped drinking caffeine, or I wanted to cut out caffeine because I didn't want it to mess with my jet lag. And that, I think, was one of the smartest things I could have done for myself, because I have not really struggled with jet lag that much since I got here. So obviously, like my first night, I was really tired, but I think that's just because I had been taking in so much that like my mind had been constantly stimulated and I hadn't really gotten this break. So really, like as soon as I got home that first night, it wasn't that hard for me to fall asleep because I was so tired. And I've only been here a couple of days, but I really haven't felt like overwhelmingly tired. Honestly, I feel less tired here than I did during my school semester when I was taking my classes and working. So that's been pretty nice. I don't know if it's because I cut out caffeine or if it's because I had an overnight flight to Paris. So I took some melatonin and I slept for most of the way there. And I think that really helped me kind of get my body on the schedule. Yeah, I really haven't struggled that much with sleeping and adjusting to the time differences. I feel more rested here, if anything. My second thing that I was worried about was that I don't know a lot of French and I am an American. And I do think that this worry was valid because I have found some difficulties with this. It has been hard getting used to not automatically knowing the language and especially hearing any English because like I mentioned, I don't live in a super touristy part of the city. So I'm not hearing English like I do when I'm by the Eiffel Tower or any other place that tourists like to go. It's also hard because I feel like there are some like unspoken societal rules here in France that you don't really know about unless you speak the language or have lived here for a while. For example, the first thing that comes to mind is when the metro gets crowded, to like stand from your seat to like make more room for people. There's like a sign on the metro that says to do that. But if you can't read French, then I don't think you would really know to stand. My very first night here, I watched a French person tell an American to stand up one time because it was crowded. So that's how I found out about the rule. But if I hadn't seen that, I definitely don't think I would have known about it until someone had to tell me about it. So I feel like it's hard kind of learning those rules. But on the other hand, it's not super hard being an American and not speaking the language because Paris is really accommodating to that. A large majority of French people speak some sort of English. And if you're in a tourist place, almost all of them can speak English, which makes it a lot easier. If you are enjoying this podcast, you might enjoy our sister podcast, City of Muses, where host Jennifer Garrity sits down with contemporary artists, poets, dancers, and performers to explore what inspires them, what their creative processes are like, and how Paris has helped or hindered their dreams come true. You can listen on parisundergroundradio.com or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Abroadening My Horizons will return right after the break. Welcome back to Abroadening My Horizons. Another worry I talked about was the fact that I am directionally challenged, and in my short time here, I have gotten lost on the metro a couple times actually, and it does get really confusing when I'm walking around and I don't understand the streets and I can never find the street signs and find out where I'm at. If you don't really know how the metro works and you're trying to figure out, that gets really confusing too. But for the most part, I actually feel like I've gotten around a lot better than I thought I was going to. I've only had like one time where I was like really turned around and I had to ask people for help. Also, my program coordinators showed us around the city my first night here. And so they took us on the tram and they took us on the metro. And I think that helped me grow more comfortable with how it works, especially when they showed us, okay, here's where you wait. Here's where you scan your card. Here's where you sit. Here's how you open the doors and all that stuff. So I think that made it definitely a lot easier the second time when I was doing it by myself. And one thing I think that's funny with like traveling around here is when we go somewhere, my coordinators are like, oh yeah, we're going to this super close place. And then we have to like ride the tram with 5 stops and then get on the metro, which will have like 9 more stops. And then we have like a 10-minute walk to get somewhere. And I think that's so funny because in my small town, if we say somewhere it's close, we mean it takes us less than like 15 minutes to get there. So I think my perception of going somewhere in Paris and it being a short trip is a lot different than the city's perception of that. And it's definitely something I've had to get used to, is that if I want to go somewhere, I should plan for like an hour to get there. So the next thing I was worried about was the fashion because like I said, I don't feel super trendy in America, and I was worried about how that would work over here. But honestly, it seems to me like everyone just kind of wears their own thing around here. And I feel like the fashion thing was like, you don't need to really stress about that at all, because I play this game when I'm out and I will try to guess if someone is actually French or not just based on what they're wearing. And I can never actually tell if they are. So I feel like I fit in fashion-wise as long as I keep my mouth shut and I don't start talking in English. I feel like no one can tell that I am not from here. But also, I've not been here very long at all. So maybe if you're actually from here or have lived here for a while, it's a lot easier to tell. And maybe everyone can tell that I'm American and I just don't know it. I feel like that could be a possibility as well. With that in mind, though, there are some things that people can wear that immediately flags them as tourists for me. The first one is pretty obvious. It's the beret. And if I see someone wearing that, I will automatically assume that they're a visitor. And I feel like that's a pretty obvious one, though, because you don't really see a lot of people wearing those. Another one is clothes that have obvious associations to France. Like some people wear I Heart Paris shirts, or if they have a shirt that has the Eiffel Tower on it or the Mona Lisa on their shirts. I feel like those people are almost tourists as well, because you don't see people in New York wearing I Heart New York shirts. So I don't know why you would wear those types of shirts in Paris as well. Also, if someone's wearing athleisure and they're not actively working out, I do assume that they're a tourist as well, because I've seen French people wearing athleisure, obviously, but it's only when they're working out or they're going and doing something active. And also, I do feel like Americans tend to wear brighter colors. Now, obviously, this isn't like always true, but if I'm in like a tourist area or by the Eiffel Tower or something, and I see a group of brightly dressed people or like girls in bright floral sundresses, I feel like more often than not, they end up being American. So the next worry I talked about was not fitting in. And I think this is something I definitely feel the most. And it's kind of hard because I feel like an outsider wherever I go because I'm not a local and I'm not from here. And that's pretty obvious. But also I'm not quite a tourist because I don't spend all day like going to the Louvre or the Eiffel Tower. I go to work and I have to go to the grocery store and get groceries for the week. And I have to do my laundry here. So I feel like I'm in this weird limbo existence where I don't quite belong because I'm not from here and I'm not staying here for like several years, but I am staying here longer than a typical tourist would, but I can't quite live like a tourist because I'm working and I live here longer than a week. So sometimes it is a little uncomfortable just not knowing where I fit in. But that discomfort has made me realize just how much I've taken for granted before coming here. I think I took a lot of my comfort for granted in America. Just being able to walk into a grocery store and use self-checkout. And I don't have to choose the English option because it's already in English. Or being on public transport and understanding the first announcement and not the second translated one. Or if a stranger walks up to me and asks me for directions or a question, I can understand them right away instead of having to tell them I don't speak French and then they walk away from me. So I've seen a lot of growth in myself for that because it's not an unbearable comfort. It's just one that's made me realize how privileged I've been before this. It's also made me have a lot of empathy for people who may come to America and don't speak English. I think like back in high school when we had our foreign exchange students, I have so much more empathy for them now and how hard that must have been coming and living in America because like I mentioned, in Paris, it's not that hard to not speak French because a lot of people speak English. But if you come to America and you don't speak English, not a lot of people speak another language, I feel like. So it has made me be a lot more empathetic to people who may be in this position in a way that I don't think I would have been before. Now I want to move on to things that have surprised me about the city within my first couple days here. So the first one is how loud Americans actually are. And I had, done my research before I got here. And so I heard that French people usually can find the Americans because of how loud we are. But I don't think I actually believed that until I got here. And I was riding a tram with some of the other interns in my program, and we noticed very quickly that you will receive dirty looks if you are being too loud. And we definitely received some dirty looks. So that's made me like hyper aware of how loud I am and how loud others are. And every time now that I'm like out in public with a friend or someone I can speak English to, I feel like I'm barely talking to them. It's almost in this whisper because I don't want everyone to associate me with being a loud American. Another thing that surprised me is that dogs are everywhere in the city. I feel like nobody ever talks about this or mentions it. And this was one of the first things I noticed when I got here was just how many people take their dogs out and about with them in the city. And I love dogs. I have a wiener dog back at home. So this was such a pleasant surprise for me to get to see so many dogs throughout the day. It just brings a smile to my face every time I see a dog because they're just so cute and they look so happy wherever they're at. And French dogs and American dogs look exactly the same and act exactly the same. So that's like nice. It's just a nice reminder of home. But I do not think it's nice when there's dog poop in the middle of the sidewalk when I'm trying to get to places because there have been a few close calls where I've almost ruined a pair of shoes because of this. while it is cute to see those dogs, it is not cute to see what they may leave behind. Another big surprise that I also feel like nobody mentions is how late the sunsets are here. And right now it sets around 11 o'clock here, which I really love. I love the extra daylight, but it's also weird because when the sun's out, I feel like I should still be out and about doing things. When in reality, it's like, no, you should be going to bed because you do have stuff you have to do the next day that require you to wake up kind of early. And so even though the sun sets so late, that doesn't necessarily mean that I should be out doing things that late because I have other responsibilities as well. So it's been kind of weird getting used to that, but it hasn't been terrible. They gave us blackout curtains in the hotel, so I've been able to survive. So my last surprise that I noticed, and I haven't been here very long, so I don't know how long this will stand up, but I feel like French people are very willing to help. And there's definitely this stereotype for French people that they're rude. And every time I told someone, oh, I'm going to live in Paris for a month back home, they'd be like, oh, good luck with the French people. They're going to be so rude to you or stuff like that. And I feel like that's really unfair stereotype because like the large majority of French people I've encountered have been so nice and so like helpful, especially when I'm really struggling. And I've noticed that French people all help each other in ways that I don't think I normally see American people doing. Like, for example, if you're on the metro, people will give up their seats for people who are holding babies or elderly people who come on. And while on one hand, I do agree that this is common courtesy, on the other, I don't know if I necessarily see this common courtesy that much in America. So it is nice that like almost everyone here in France gives up their seat without hesitation for that. When I feel like in America, if you gave up your seat, you'd be almost hailed as this good Samaritan, where it's like this should just be the standard for people. And when I see this happening, it just feels like French people almost seem to be in this sense of like looking out and caring for each other. Whereas I feel like in America, it can be very much every man for himself the majority of the time. Yeah, my first impression of this place has been beautiful and it's been full of adventure, but there have also been moments of discomfort and uneasiness. And I do think it's really important to acknowledge this and embrace this full spectrum of what it is like to go travel and work and live in another country, because it's an experience like no other. And I don't think you can really fully explain it unless you're living it. Thank you for listening to Abroadening My Horizons on Paris Underground Radio. I'm your host, Abby Riffel. If you liked this podcast, please make sure to rate it and give it a review. If you want to get in touch, you can reach me at hello@parisundergroundradio.com or on Instagram at abbyriffel_. Thank you for listening.
This episode was produced by Abby Riffel and Jennifer Garrity for Paris Underground Radio. For more on this show and shows like it, please visit parisundergroundradio.com.